Hello everyone, my name's Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stonesy. Yeah, nothing really interesting has happened. Something really interesting has happened. Our Piglin friend is trying to figure out the way of the world, and he's doing a pretty great job of it, actually. But yeah, but instead of talking about it, let's just read more on it. With Chapter 11, Striding Home. Farnham wasn't quite sure how he made it to the surface. He was so terrified the entire time he wasn't sure he wouldn't just stop breathing at some point. Instead, he kept digging and climbing until he felt the sun on his face once more. The Strider came along behind him every step of the way, as if it had been his pet since birth. Farnham wasn't sure if it was because it's something become so attached to him or because he didn't want to be trapped in the underworld anymore like he did. But he felt better having it along, despite how much the creature shivered. He wondered if the Strider would have been better off back in the Nether. It hadn't looked all that healthy there either, though. He supposed if it wanted, it could have turned back to the portal at any time. But it stuck with him instead. He felt incredibly grateful for that. The worst part of Farnham being trapped in the underworld when he was young and being awful solitude of it all, the feeling that he was trapped there all by himself and would die there all alone, that no one might ever find him and he'd be entombed in solitude like that for all time. Having the Strider by his side helped push those resurgent fears away. In fact, they helped spur him on. He couldn't just stop and feel sorry for himself at any point in the process of excavating himself, as that would have meant watching the Strider suffer with him. And he couldn't stomach that. When Farnham made it to the surface, the first thing he did was bring the Strider up after him and bring it a big hug to celebrate the victory all over that rock and dirt had stood between them and freedom. The creature wasn't able to hug him back, of course, but it nuzzled up to him, still shivering. We need to get you to the zoo right away so I can figure out how to help you, Farnham said, and he set straight out to do that. Fortunately, it seemed like he had come out of the underworld at the same time of the mountains, in which he and his friends had started, which meant all he had to do was figure out which direction was town from there. He set out directly from the mountains. As he receded behind them and began to recognize landmarks on their face that seemed familiar, he realized he was a bit farther south than he needed to be, so he corrected course. When he came upon a set of minecart tracks that ran directly away from the mountains, he literally cheered out loud. This close to town, he knew they had to lead back there. He had to do this point was follow them. He wondered what happened to Micah and Grinchard. Had they somehow become trapped in that cave too? Did they realize that he'd gotten swept away in the river or not? Were they still looking for him? He didn't know about any of that, but he did know the Strider was suffering. He needed to take care of it first, and then he would go looking for his friends. Maybe he could even rally a search party to help them find him before they got into much trouble as he had. The idea of him having someone else for once heartened him. He told himself he'd probably worrying about nothing. The others were experienced travelers, and there were probably nothing out there the two of them couldn't handle, with or without them. Farnham's big mistake was getting separated from them in the first place. If they all got stuck together instead of wandering off separately, he could have been fine. They all would have. The night was falling as Farnham finally made it into town. As he approached, he saw some sort of gathering happening in the main square. He intended to head straight for the zoo to get the Strider settled in and taken care of, but he's too curious about what was happening in the square just to ignore it. So many people were gathered in the square that Farnham couldn't see who was in the center of it all, what they were talking about. He stood on his tiptoes, craned his neck to try to figure it out, but too many others blocked his way. As he stood there, though, the Strider began letting a low moan that people nearest to Farnham could not ignore. They sat at the strange creature in Farnham and sidled away to give them ample space. Farnham took advantage of this by edging forward a bit more, and the process repeated itself for a fresh group of visitors. Moments later, Farnham found himself standing in front of the edge of the crowd, with the Strider next to him. As he emerged just behind the last row of town folks blocking his view, he saw that folks in the center of the square were not other than Micah and Grinchard, and they were trying to convince the village mayor to help them gather a search party. It's crucial that we find him before the sun sets again, or he may suffer or even die of thirst, Grinchard said. Let's just hold on for a moment. The mayor put up her hands and asking for calm. It's not like people who don't wander off into the wilderness to explore from time to time. There's no reason to panic. Despite that, Micah wasn't having any of the mayor's excuses. Do you have any idea who you're talking about? He's been avoiding the chance of being trapped in the ground since we were kids. This is Farnham we're talking about. Grinchard gave Micah a gentle elbow in the ribs. Do you mean that, Farnham? The explorer pointed right over the zookeeper, this amazing animal he brought with him. And Farnham gave his goggle-eyed friend a half-embarrassed wave. Micah gasped, and the entire crowd gasped with her. The mayor clapped her hands together and dusted them off as she completed a long day of work. See? She said. Nothing to worry about, no reason to panic. Most of the crowd dispersed at that point, heading back to their homes and shaking their heads at the commotion over nothing at all. Others flashed understanding smiles at Farnham and his friends, relieved that Farnham was back safe and sound, looking a little worse for wear. Micro and Grinchard stormed over to Farnham and looked him up in the massive group hug. Micro grabbed him by the shoulders and inspected his injuries. You had us worried. Grinchard chuckled as a rueful shake of head. We almost had the entire town ready to dig up half the mountain looking for you. We're just glad you're okay. What happened to you? Micro seemed satisfied that Farnham was physically okay at least, but she was terribly concerned for him. We heard you shouting the nothing. We scoured the entire cavern looking for you. Farnham braced himself and launched into an entire story, but the Strider interrupted him with a deep shudder and a low moan. Farnham reached out to comfort the creature and told the others, I'll tell you the whole thing when we get this guy to the zoo. The others agreed in a round of nods. They all hustled over to Farnham's place. As they strode along, Richard stared at Farnham's new friend. Is that a Strider? Where did you find them? I thought they were native to the Nether. Farnham liked the respect he saw in his friend's eye. It's a long story, he said with a nod. Despite that, it didn't take them too long to tell it. By the time the three of them, plus the Strider, reached the zoo gates, Farnham had told his friends everything about the inadvertent adventure. Grinchard blew out a long, relieved sigh. You're one lucky zookeeper. You could have died at so many points today. Micro kept shaking her head in disbelief. Going over an underground waterfall, activating an obsidian portal, entering the Nether, meeting a piglin who didn't try to kill you, and bringing back a Strider alive. Grinchard clapped Farnham on the back. Good on you. Farnham grinned as he escorted them all to the zoo. He wasn't used to getting such praise from a far braver than those accomplished friends, and he liked it. Thank you, he said. I'm sorry I put you in so much trouble, what with gathering and search party and all, and I really appreciate it. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. Never, Micro said. Grinchard gave Farnham a firm nod in agreement. I'm just happy to be home. Farnham turned and regarded the Strider. Now, we need to figure out what's wrong with my new pal here. The Strider shuddered again. His time for much longer. He seems cold, Micro said. Let's light him on fire. Farnham escorted the Strider in an empty pen, and Grinchard built a fire next to the creature. Soon it was roaring and kicking off a searing heat. The Strider edged closer to it until he was almost touching the flames. Instead of moaning like it had been in grunted improved comfort. That seems to help, but he looks cold, Farnham said. The fire not be enough. Grinchard stuck a finger into the air and the idea struck him. The Nether's full of lava. Striders like this one here can actually walk across it without being hurt, much less getting incinerated. We should probably build him right on top of this fire. Farnham looked back at the Strider and saw that this creature had already worked up his way nearly on the top of the fire. Trouble was it was starting to smother it. He seems to be happy enough for now, and that's not going to last for long. We need a more permanent solution if he's going to stay here. Or what? Micro gazed at wide-eyed Farnham as he babbling utter nonsense. You're going to bring him back to the Nether to set him free? I think I know that would work, Grinchard said. Lava. Farnham cocked his head in confusion. So I should bring him back to the Nether? Grinchard laughed. The Nether isn't the only place you can find lava, you know. There's plenty of it underground, if you know where to look. Ooh, and I do, Micro started for the exit. I'll be right back. While Micro was gone, Farnham tried to get the Strider to eat something, but it turned up his nose that most of the food he offered would have begrudgingly ate some mushrooms he found in the corner of the zoo's feed shed. Watching the Striders munching the mushrooms reminded Farnham that he wasn't eating far too long himself. Grinchard followed him to the kitchen and insisted that he sit and rest while they cooked up a delightful dinner. The two of them were settling down to eat when Micro showed up, dusting her hands. And that's that, she said and sat down inside the table. Dinner looks great. How's the Strider? Farnham asked, concerned. Much better now, she grinned at her friends. I built him a fireproof tub and hauled up enough lava to fill it to the brim. He's wallowing in it right now like a pig in mud. Thank you, Farnham raised his glass. To friends who are always there for you, no matter what. To friends, the others said as they all clinked their glasses together.
Chapter 12. The Discovery.
It took Crichton more time than they cared to think about, but eventually they figured out what the ancient Piglins had carved into the wall in the mysterious cavern, and it stunned them to the core. Deciphering images like these weren't an exact science. The drawings could mean different things and match with other things, and Crichton didn't understand much about the historical context necessary to interpret that. At best, they could tell there had been three factions of invaders that seemed like they had been unstoppable. Together, they had conquered everything in their path. The only thing the advisor could understand was if they had in fact been Piglins, how they'd done it, or the mighty force of the Piglins to invade the overworld. They might just have been the first to figure out the cure of poisoning that affected them, and that when they left the Nether to plunder this ripe and wonderful place. The drawing showed three different hordes of what Crichton believed were Piglins. These images are the first featured motion lines that show the moving around at top speed, able to race past the others and dash around even their foes. The drawings of the second horde showed them clustered around half-finished structures that looked a lot like the Piglin bastions crumbled back in the nether. The way some of the invaders were hauling blocks up the others, it would seem as though they were building these bastions fresh and new. In Critten's mind, this confirmed that these creatures were Piglins, as no other built such places, at least that the advisor knew about. Squiggly lines arose in the members in the last horde. The advisor couldn't be sure what these represented, but from the way the horde foes, and even Fred's, fled from those squiggles, they had to stand for something powerful. Perhaps those piglins had incredibly smelly, to the point where their stench drove their foes from their presence. Critten wasn't quite sure they'd gotten to the part right, but they couldn't come up with a better guess. In the section of the mural, Critten spied an image of what seemed like a massive piglin carrying an incredible weapon, a spiked block swinging about the end of the chain. The drawing sat near the bottom of the mural, and someone had drawn an arrow that pointed straight down toward a lump in the ground. Curious, Critten dug up the lump and discovered a chain. They kept digging and following the chain, so they unearthed the entire thing, a vicious weapon that looks much like the one on the wall. For Critten, this discovery reinforced the story the drawing seemed to be trying to tell. This might not be some fanciful tale, but an actual legend. They inspected the weapon and discovered that the block at the end of the dark metal was the kind of weapon that any piglin could covet. The advisor tested it out, swinging it around, and nearly hitting himself in the head. They decided that such an unwieldy weapon might not be for them. At least, not yet. For Critten, the mural combined the weapon seemed to confirm several such legends that they had heard before, but they also brought up more questions than they answered. If the piglins had once conquered the overworld, how could they have fallen so low? What had kicked them out of the overworld and back into the nether? They had been driven out by some powerful force, or had somehow turned on one another instead. Had the cure for the overworld poisoning failed them, or had something else been at work? Something that had driven the piglins permanently from that land? Those last questions plagued Critten's every thought. Had something gone wrong with the ancient piglins' solution for that awful poisoning? Or could Critten replicate their solution? Or maybe find another way to avoid it? There was only one way to figure all this out. As distasteful as it seemed, they didn't have the resources they needed there in the pit to survive for much less than doing deep research. Because of that, they had no other choice. They were going to have to sneak back into Bungus's bastion. Getting out of the pit didn't turn out to be nearly as difficult as Critten had feared. It turned out the Strider would simply walk down into a place in the passageway, hidden behind the obsidian portal. To Critten's embarrassment, it had taken them a while to figure this out. The active portal had blocked the side of it, and for the longest time the advisor had not thought to look behind it. Instead, they set out to follow the wall of the cavern, just like they had before, and they got all the way around the entire place before they saw what they'd been missing. Perhaps the ancient piglins had used the passageway as a means to get to Bungus Bastion and the obsidian gate from there the other world. It seemed lucky that the Strider hadn't accidentally wandered through the portal itself. Maybe the portal hadn't been activated when the Strider entered the cavern, or maybe the silly animal had wandered into a portal and back out again. Unless they returned to the nether and suddenly developed the ability to talk, Critten would likely never know. Putting that question aside, the advisor followed the passageway behind the obsidian portal up and around and through many blocks of rock, until it eventually came out into the open nether, but into an underground room that Critten couldn't recognize at first. After a bit of exploration, though, the advisor confirmed their suspicions that this was in fact the chamber in the basement of the Great Bungus Bastion. Of all places for Ugub to hurl Critten into, it turned out that it featured a secret passage back into the bastion. The ancient piglins had been much smarter than Critten could have imagined, which met with much greater foresight than Critten thought about how piglins like Great Bungus and Ugub were now in charge for their people. It almost broke their heart to think how piglins had fallen so far. That made them even more determined to do something about the injustice. If Critten didn't know the secret basement room, chances were good that the few bastion's current residents did either. With a bit of luck and cunning, the advisor might be able to sneak around this place without anyone being the wiser. After all, Bungus' soldiers were looking for Critten outside the bastion, not inside it. Critten drew their axe and went looking for what they needed. They found their way into the vast storehouse under the bastion where the piglins kept their food. They refilled their pack this time with the best food they could find, and they stuffed their pack of plenty of other supplies. As they were doing this, Critten heard one of thing they had really been hoping for, snoring. Critten knew that some of the lowest, laziest piglins of the bastion liked to shirk work by hiding out in the storerooms. Bungus often railed against these slackers and ordered Ugub to root them out and exile them into the nether, just as they'd done to Critten. They were generally too clever for Ugub to find them, though, but not too clever for Critten. They moved aside a loose chest, and a stack of them slipped past it, makeshift hideout on the other side. There, Crichton found a pair of greasy young piglins who had likely never done an honest day's work in their lives. The shocking part was that Upgub hadn't been able to find them with the stench alone, surrounded by what were rotting scraps of food and filthy clothing and bedding. The two piglins appeared to pass out, over-drooling and stolen food. Crichton nudged one of them with a boot and got nothing from them more an irritated and irritating snore. Crichton finished a length of rope out of their pack and put the edge of their axe against the neck of one of the piglins. When they jabbed the sleepy pigling in the throat with it until they woke up with a squeal. Crichton handed the wide-eyed, trembling piglin a length rope. Tie your friend up with this. If you wake them up while you do it, that will be the last mistake you ever make. Terrified piglins nodded silently and tried to stifle their snuffling as they followed the advisor's orders. In mere moments, they had their companions' hands bound in front of them and their ankles had knobbled together. Crichton handed them another length of rope. Now your ankles. When they were done, Crichton inspected their work and made them do it over, properly this time. The advisor wasn't sure if the slacker was trying to prepare for eventual escape or was just lousy at tying knots. But they supposed it didn't matter in the end. After some potentially painful, well, not for the advisor, negotiations, Crichton managed to get the slacker's hand bound too, and inspected all the knots on both the piglins. They should do for now. When they woke up, the sleeping slacker, who was shocked and discovered the new situation, and led a pair of prisoners out of the storeroom and into the basement room and the secret door. Soon enough, they made it back to the bottom of the pit, where the obsidian portal had swirled at them, beckoning them to enter. The prisoners had been trembling in fear the entire march down here, but now their legs gave out underneath them. This suited Crichton just fine. They took one of the piglins and bound them in an outcropping of the rock next to the obsidian portal. Then they took the other one, hauled them to their feet, and gave one end of the good length of rope. Crichton jabbed the hapless prisoner in the end of their axe. Now go through the portal and stay there on the other side. If you come back through there before I tell you to, I'll chop you in half on the spot. No, the piglin bound in the rock said. Don't do it. Crichton kept their axe and eyes on the piglin in front of them, but spoke to the other one. If they refuse, I'll get rid of them and send you in there instead. The other piglin gasped in horror and then spoke their friend. Their cackling of their son. Well then, what do you have to lose? The piglin with the axe in their chest scowled with their faceless friend, then nodded Crichton. Fine, I'll do it. With that, the piglin turned to face the obsidian portal, and without any ceremony or further hesitation, walked right through the purple field, trailing the length of the rope behind him. Crichton grabbed the loose end of the rope and held it off the ground. To their amazement, the other end of it remained hanging in the middle of the portal's purple field, even though the rest of it now in the other world. Crichton waited for a good long time to see what would happen next. They figured that the piglin in the cavern would eventually get scared by the poisoning and come back through the portal, at which point the advisor would have stabbed them to prove the other piglin that they meant what they said. Crichton's amazement, the rope remained hovering in the portal, right up until they abruptly sagged downward. Frowning, Crichton put down the end of the rope and followed through the portal. Keep their axe ready before them. On the other side, they found the piglin collapsed on the island. They were unconscious but still breathing. Not wanting to spend any more time in the poisonous world if they had to, Crichton returned to the nether and hauled on the rope until the unconscious piglin slipped over the nether as well. Oh no, the other piglin began to snuffle in horror at their friend's fate. What are you doing? Crichton bound the knocked up piglin and turned their full attention to the other. Learning. Chapter 13. The Zoo Star. Welcome, 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 Farnham said to the crowd as they gathered inside the zoo's gates. After all the preparations that he and his friends had made for the Strider's habitat, it was finally the day to open the part of the zoo to the public and give the people a chance to meet the Strider for themselves. Even with his friend's help, it had taken Farnham more than a week to get everything in order, and he had to shut down the zoo for that entire time. Meanwhile, in their off hours, he'd gone around to every public place in the entire time and told people about the wonderful things they'd been doing and how amazing the Strider would be to see. He hoped he'd be able to drum up some interest by talking it all up. But until he came out of that morning to open the gates, he hadn't realized how successful he'd been. There had never been so many people who wanted to enter the zoo at once. For the first time ever, Farnham's had to say the words, "Would you please make a line?" Normally, he'd just let people in as they wished, but so many of them wouldn't fit in the place at once. Not without potentially scaring all the animals. He didn't want to risk that, especially not when it's Strider's first day to be introduced to the public. Come on, one at a time, please. Stay to the left and follow the wall to the right. You will be able to see all the animals and spend plenty of time with them. He shaded his eyes and looked at the people who had potentially lined up the request. They maybe didn't speak the same language, but they seemed to have understand him all the same. There were a few of them that didn't recognize at all. He wondered if they actually come here from outside of town to see the zoo. Had the zoo become this tourist attraction? This is amazing, Farnham said to Micah as he approached him and patted him on the shoulder. Look at all these people. Congratulations, she favored him with a proud smile. You worked hard at this. We all did, thank you. And gratitude. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Maybe you should thank us after you go check out the Strider's pen, Micro said with a small wince. She didn't need to say another word. She just shooed him away over watching the door for him. He trotted over to the new attractions pen. He and his friend had done an amazing job with it, he had to admit. Not only had they reinforced the pen to both keep the Strider from wandering off and protect it from outside mobs, they built a pool of lava and the Strider to enjoy at all times. They had taken lots of work. Grinch had helped find the source of lava, and 3 of them had then brought it to the zoo, bucket by bucket. Farnham had worried that bringing lava to the zoo might be dangerous, and he wasn't convinced that it was actually safe, but it made the Strider happy. The creature had been so excited Grinch had volunteered to help train it so it could work off some of its excess energy and become happy in its new home. Farnham hadn't been able to argue against logic like that, or against the results. He had never seen the Strider in such a good mood, and it seemed healthy as it could be, thriving even. And when he walked in the Strider part of the zoo and found Grinchard riding the creature, the adventurer had somehow come up with a saddle and strapped on top of the Strider like it was a mount, and now they were riding across the surface of the pen's lava pool. So at the saddle, Grinchard didn't seem to have any control on which way the creature trotted, but it wasn't like there was a massive amount of room in the pen anyhow. The explorer just grinned as they rode the Strider all around the pen at random. The zoo's visitors all stopped and gaped at the sight, which helped explain why traffic had backed up with this part of the zoo. Farnham opened his mouth and yelled at Grinchard and ordered him to get off the Strider and back to the side of the fence's pen, where they belonged, and then something shut him up. He couldn't actually exactly have what stopped him. Maybe it was the way the visitors goggled at the sight. Maybe something he rarely seen happen at a zoo till that day. Maybe it was how content the Strider seemed to be the rider on his back, encouraging to traipse back and forth across the lava in whatever direction pleased it. Or maybe it was a goofy smile on his friend's face. They're having a ball out there. Farnham turned to find Micro at his shoulder, watching the wild show in the pen, laughing around the cloud, and nodded toward Grinchard. Don't you think? I wasn't sure if you meant the Strider or the person riding it. Fair, Micro chuckled. You know, if Grinchard had a fishing rod with a warped fungus dangling at the end of it, I bet they could get that Strider to go anywhere he wanted to, rather than just having it wander around at random. Actually, I have some of that. The piglin I met in the Nether gave it to me. Maybe for the exact purpose. I have to mention that to Grinchard when they're done, Farnham said, laughing. Not just quite yet. Maybe we should get the 2 of them up to do this sort of thing in the regular schedule. Give the visitors something to look forward to, and maybe spread out the crowd a little too. That's not a bad idea at all, Farnham scratched his chin. And it might keep Grinchard around a bit longer too before they get bored and wander off again. Micah put a hand on his shoulder. They always come back. We both do. Do you know why that is? Farnham shrugged. Not right getting where this is leading to. To resupply, I always figured. Sure, that's part of it. You want food and drink and fresh clothes and equipment and all the other things to survive out there in the wild world. But after many days and nights alone, that's not what draws you back. Not really. Farnham narrowed his eyes at Micah, who never let her gaze wander from Grinchard having so much fun atop the Strider. Not for an instant. It's the need you know you're not alone, even when you're out for days and weeks or months at a time. Not really. Farnham finally got it. You're always welcome back here. I'll keep a home fires burning for you both. Micah laughed gently at that. It'll be a lot easier to manage that now that you've gotten all the lava right here. That it will. Aw, how cute. That's actually really sweet. Okay. Well. So, that was kind of an interesting little chapter, you know? It wasn't too much. It wasn't too weird. It was just nice. Sorry, let me write this down. Perfect. Okay, so that's our next pages next time. Next time we're doing chapter 14, or Discovered, where we go from 99 all the way, oops, I titled this wrong, whatever, 99 all the way to 120, does that 120 even exist? 121, or, okay, screw it. Yeah, we're going to do it to 122. Big reading day tomorrow. Big reading day. Oh, and it's finally time to boop, move it a couple pixels, which never makes anything look pretty, but whatever. Anyways, I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. People like me fishing. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I am genuinely liking this book, and this has so far been pretty good. So, yeah, hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!